Okay, moving forward, we're going to now get into our review of the question strategy for the yes, no, not given question. As you know, this question is also referred to as the true, false, not given question. So, with the yes, no, not given question, in regards to just some basic information, this question is really asking you to compare two sentences. It's really a sentence comparison question. And so they're asking you to compare the question and the matching passage sentence, and then determining if the question information is true, false, or not given. If the question information is true, false, or not given. So really you're comparing two sentences. You're comparing two sentences. The first challenge is of course scanning. You have to be able to find the keywords in the question and then scan the passage and locate those keywords. Now, it's very helpful knowing that this question goes in order. So, one job that you have is to be able to recognize the easiest question to find first. So, for example, if question number 3 has a person's name, Alexander the Great, right? It has Alexander the Great as the name. And that name is going to be pretty easy to find, right? Pretty easy to find. So, if I find number 3 first, if I find number 3 first, that tells me that number 2 and 1 are directly above it, and numbers 4 and 5 are below that. So having really good scanning technique for this question is very helpful. Now, after you're able to scan for the matching sentence, you then have to determine yes, no, not given. And that really involves your understanding how to recognize those categories. And because people come from different parts of the world, their interpretations of yes, no, and not given can be somewhat different. So it's important for you to understand, according to the IELTS exam, what does yes mean, what does no mean, and then what is the meaning of not given. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that everybody has that clear understanding. Now, a few more things before we go over that. This is an in order question type. It's a great question to complete first, like within a question set. Within a question set, it's a really good question to complete first. So if you're in reading passage number 1 and you have a paragraph location question, a matching question, and a yes, no, not given question, I would do the yes, no, not given question first because it goes in order, and it also gives me an opportunity to look at the passage while I'm answering the yes, no, not given question. That way, when I go back and do the paragraph location and the matching question, it makes it much easier. Also, this question, right around probably around 80 or 85% of it is going to be a single sentence to a single sentence match. However, one thing that they've been doing lately on the exam, one thing they've been doing is they've been using two sentences from the passage to create a question. So within, for example, paragraph number 2, they may use some language from sentence number 2 and some language from sentence number 3 to create a compound sentence as a question, or use that language to create a question. And so now you may have to look at two sentences instead of one sentence. So they're doing that more and more. Those are just some of the things that they're doing to increase the difficulty level of the exam. And so you want to be aware of that because that's something I've been noticing lately. Now, let's go ahead and get into true, false, and not given and what that means. So, when we say true, we mean 100% true. That means every element of the question must be present. Every essential element of the question must be present in the matching passage sentence. Remember, you're comparing the question to the passage, not the passage to the question. Also, don't make inferences. Do not make an inference. You're not required. You're not making an inference, right? Something is either 100% true. You can't say, well, maybe, or I'm inferring truth. That's not the way it works. False is where something has been changed. right? Something has been changed. False does not mean a missing element. And a lot of students get confused with that. False means that something is different or changed from the question to the passage, the matching passage sentence. And then with not given, what we're dealing with not given is where you have something missing. Some part of the question language, the object, the subject, some type of restrictive language like only or always is missing when you're comparing it to the matching passage sentence. When information is missing, when it's missing, the answer is not given. All right? The answer is not given. You have to, and some people get confused between false and not given. False is when something is changed. Something is changed or different. Not given is where something is missing. So let's look at the way this works. So here we see a series. What I've done here is you have the question and the matching passage language right above and below each other. Okay? So for example, this first one, it says, it is generally believed that large numbers of people were needed to build the pyramids. And then when you look at the matching sentence, it says the conventional picture, that's the synonym for what? Generally believed, is that tens of thousands of slaves drag stones on sledges. Large numbers of people, tens of thousands, that's a match. So now we have a match, and therefore this answer would be true. Now some of you may be saying, well, where does it talk about building the pyramids? Look at the previous sentence. This is what I was talking about before, right? They're using language from the first sentence and the second sentence to create the question, right? They've taken the language from the first sentence and the second sentence, combined that information together to create the question, okay? But the matching the language that we need to look for and make sure that we see is conventional, which is synonym for generally, and large numbers, which is synonym for tens of thousands. Everything is there, so then we have a true answer. And then for the second one, it says Clemens found a strange hieroglyph on the wall of an Egyptian monument. Okay, now it says, now a California software consultant named Maureen Clemens has suggested that kites might have been involved. While perusing a book on the monuments of Egypt, she noticed a hieroglyph that showed a row of men standing in odd postures. So this is an example of false because something has been changed or different between the question and the passage, right? Between the question and the passage. In the question, it says she saw the hieroglyph on the wall of an Egyptian monument. In the passage, it says she saw this while perusing a book. That is an example of something that has been changed or different. That's when something is false. Number 3, Gharib had previously done experiments on bird flight. Intrigued, Clemens contacted Morteza Gharib, aeronautics professor at the California Institute of Technology. He was fascinated by the idea coming from Iran. I have a keen interest in Middle Eastern science, he says. He, too, was puzzled by the picture that had sparked Clemens' interest. Now, in this situation, there is language from the question. There's language from the question that is missing in the passage, in the matching passage sentence. There's nothing that says Gharib did experiments on bird flight. Nothing, right? It's missing. That means that that means you put the answer is not given because there's language from the question that is not mentioned in the matching passage sentence or sentences. That's how you do true, false, not given, everybody. That's how you do yes, no, not given. Let's look at another example. right? In this one, it says European settlers built fences to keep their cattle and horses inside. European settlers built fences to keep their cattle and horses inside. The sentence says cattle and horses were brought ashore in the early 1600s and found hospitable climate and terrain in North America, right? So this is an example of false. This is an example of false because something has been changed. In number 9, it says the European settlers built fences to keep them inside. However, in the sentence I just wrote, in the sentence I just read, it says that they brought the cattle and horses ashore where they found hospitable climate and terrain. That means they were allowed to go free. They were not kept inside, right? That is opposite. That is change. That is different. That's false. Number 10 says the indigenous people have been brutally killed by the European colonists. And then when you look at number 10 in paragraph E, that other language you see highlighted is for another question, right? It's for a different question, for a different type of question. It might be a fill the blank question or something else. But we're looking at paragraph E, and it says indigenous peoples suffered from white brutality, alcoholism, the killing and driving off of game. Okay? And it says the indigenous people have been brutally killed by the European colonists. And here, our situation, the answer is going to be true. It's going to be true. It's going to be true. All right. Now, let's move on. And I'll do one more example for you guys. In this one, look at number 8. It says Bingham went to South America in search of an Inca city. And then in paragraph A, it says his goal was to locate the remains of a city called Vitcos, the last capital of the Inca civilization. So we have a match there, right? We have a match there. His goal was to locate the remains of a city called Vitcos, the last capital of the Inca civilization. So he did go to South America. He did go in search of an Inca city. Okay? And then for number 9, it says Bingham chose a particular route down the Urubamba Valley because it was the most common route used by travelers. All right, and it says in paragraph B, when Bingham and his team set off down the Urubamba in late July, that's how I know we're in the right sentence, they had an advantage over travelers who had preceded them. A track had been blasted down the valley canyon to enable rubber to be brought up by mules from the jungle. So here we have, now look at what it says. Right? Look at what it says. Right? And see if you can see why the answer is false. Right? Bingham chose a particular route because it was the most common route used by travelers. But here it says they had an advantage over travelers, right? An advantage over travelers who had preceded them. A track had been recently blasted down the valley canyon to enable rubber to be brought up by mules and mules from the jungle. So it was not the most common route used by travelers, right? This is an example of an answer that is false. Okay, let's look at another one. So we're looking at a yes, no, not given question. We see the strategy over there, identify the key words, start with the easiest to scan, read the sentence match, apply the answer strategy. So with number 1, it says, in the United States, farmers use honeybees in large scale over the past few years. So in paragraph B, we see the answer to number 1 is yes. The total number of hives involved in the U.S. pollination industry has been somewhere between 2.5 million and 3 million in recent years. So here we have a match, right? In recent years is a synonym for over the past few years. In large scale is a synonym for 2.5 million to 3 million. And then we see in the United States. And we see the pollination industry, which is synonym for farms or farming, right? So all the information is there. They're using synonyms. So you have to be able to recognize synonym language. That's an example of yes. Number 2 is right here in terms of not given, because number 2 is about clean farming, and here we see the language for clean farming. So it says, meanwhile, American farmers began using large quantities of insecticides. I'm not going to try to pronounce that word, organophosphate. I guess I will. Quantities of organophosphate insecticides, planted large-scale crop monocultures, and adopted clean farming practices that scrubbed native vegetation from field margins and roadsides. Now, in the question, it says what? It says that the cleaning farming practices would be harmful to farmers. When we look at this matching sentence information, do we see anywhere there it says that it's harmful to farmers? Now, in the next sentence, it says these practices. And we could read that next sentence because it says these practices. That's a reference pronoun. That means that those two sentences are connected. It says they killed many bees. But it does not say anywhere that it would be harmful to farmers. And what you don't do is make an inference. In addition to that, you don't use your own background knowledge and say, well, I work in that industry, or I read something in a magazine somewhere and it said it. No. You only base an answer on what is available from the question. And then number 3, it says the blue orchard bee is the most efficient pollinator among native bees for every crop. Now, when I look at that sentence for number 3, the language that really jumps out for me is the language every crop. Every. Because the word every is like all, always, none. It's extreme language. I know they like to play around with that language to make answers to be yes, no, or not given. So you look in paragraph E, and it says, on the other hand, native bees can be much more efficient pollinators of certain crops than honeybees, so you don't need as many to do the job. For example, again, these two sentences are connected because it says, for example, about 750 blue orchard bees can pollinate a hectare of apples or almonds. So this is clearly an answer that is going to be no, because in the question, it says they're the most efficient for every crop. In the passage, it says they're more efficient for apples or orchard crops, right? This is different. They're saying something different. In the question, they said every crop. In the passage, it said for apples and almonds. That means it's limited to 2. All right, so coming up next, we're going to be taking a look at full passage application, scanning, and answer application. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you have a little bit more clear understanding of what is yes, what is no, and what is not given. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to teaching you again soon.